didn't expect to bring it up. You were sitting in the doctor's office, routine checkup, just you and the slow hum of a blood pressure monitor. He was going through the basics: heart rate, joints, memory, sleep. Then he paused, flipped a page in your chart, and asked something that caught you off guard. "Are you still sexually active?" You hesitated, not because you were ashamed, but because you weren't sure how to say the truth without sounding like a punchline. You answered honestly, "I don't sleep around. I live alone. But, yeah, I still take care of myself." He didn't laugh. He nodded, and then he said it. "If you're still masturbating regularly at 70 or 80, there are a few things you should know." You didn't expect that. You sat there, quiet, as his tone shifted. Not judgmental, but serious. That conversation stayed with you, and everything that came after, you never forgot. You got home that evening and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. You weren't embarrassed, but you were curious, because no one ever tells you what to expect. Not at this age. Not when it comes to your body, to your habits, to your private rhythms. And what your doctor said that day wasn't a warning out of fear. It was out of care. You pulled out your old notebook, the one where you write down things you don't tell anyone, and you wrote at the top of a clean page, 8 things no one told me about masturbation after 70. Not because you were ashamed, but because you were finally ready to understand your body without pretending it doesn't matter anymore. The first thing you wrote down came straight from the doctor's lips. 1. It's normal, but your body isn't built the same anymore. He told you the truth, not to stop, but to understand. At 70, at 80, your cardiovascular system works harder. Your recovery time takes longer. Your tissues are thinner, your skin more sensitive, and arousal doesn't mean what it once did. The signals are slower, the satisfaction different, and that's okay. But too many men, especially those living alone, don't adjust their expectations. They push, they force, they treat their bodies like they're still 40, until something breaks. And the warning wasn't, don't. It was, be honest with what your body can handle now. You sat with that, and you realized you hadn't updated your understanding of yourself in decades. That needed to change. You added the second line to your notebook, slowly. 2. What used to be harmless now affects your sleep, your hormones, even your heart rate. Because stimulation at this age isn't just a release, it's a whole body event. And if you're not paying attention, you'll feel it later. In your joints, in your chest, in your mood. The doctor called it late response fatigue. It doesn't hit right away, but your body remembers. And you started thinking back to those nights you felt foggy the next day, tight in the chest, weaker in the knees. You never connected the dots. Now you could. You paused, closed the notebook, looked at your reflection, and you said, with no shame in your voice, "I can keep doing this, but I need to do it like someone who respects the body that's still here." That was the beginning of care, of wisdom, of finally being honest about what pleasure means now. Not to impress, not to escape, but to honor. If this story helped you feel seen, if it brought you comfort in a topic no one dares to discuss, please consider subscribing, because here we don't shame the truth. We explore it with courage, with compassion, and with the quiet strength that comes from finally saying, "My body still matters, and I will treat it that way." Later in the video, you'll uncover what your doctor said next, how one private habit, when misunderstood, can impact your prostate, your memory, and your dignity more than you realized. You sat at the edge of the bed that night, not tired, not restless, just aware. Something about that conversation earlier wouldn't leave you. It followed you into the silence, into your routines, into the moment you usually kept to yourself. And when it passed, when you finished, you felt something you didn't expect. Empty, not regretful, not ashamed, just unsteady, like your body had just gone through something it didn't fully bounce back from. And for the first time in your life, you asked the question out loud. Why does this feel different now? You opened the notebook again. Page still open from earlier. 2 truths already written. And now, the third one needed to be added. Because it wasn't about the act. It was about what came after. 3. At this age, climax can drain your nervous system, not just your energy. Your doctor had mentioned it, almost in passing. Release causes a sudden drop in blood pressure and a shift in brain chemistry. It's natural, but in your 70s and 80s, it hits harder. And suddenly the fog you felt, the dullness in your chest, the light sweat, the quiet sense of sadness after. It made sense. Your body didn't need less care. It needed more. Because what once was a release could now quietly act as a stressor, especially if you weren't hydrating, if your electrolytes were low, if you skipped meals, if your breathing was shallow during the act. It wasn't a moral issue. It was a physiological truth. You added another line to the page. 4. Masturbation can affect your mood because your brain is more sensitive to the chemical drop. Dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all the feel-good chemicals still get released, but your body doesn't hold them as long anymore. Your brain takes longer to reset, and if you're already lonely, already wrestling with long stretches of silence, that sudden drop can hit harder. You started to realize, it's not that the act hurts me, it's that I haven't been preparing for the emotional dip that follows. You were treating your body like it was still 40, when really, it was asking you to be gentler, to care before, to care after, to understand that pleasure now comes with a cost, and the way to handle that cost is with attention. You closed your notebook, walked to the sink, splashed cool water on your face, drank slowly, and whispered, "This isn't about giving it up. It's about honoring how far I've come." You looked at your reflection, older now, softer, but still deserving of touch, and you began to understand something your doctor hadn't said, but you felt anyway. This isn't about the act. It's about whether you still treat your body like something worthy of care. And when you do, everything feels different, not perfect, but present. Later in the video, you'll uncover what most older men never hear, how private release can affect your prostate, muscle strength, and even memory, especially if it becomes your only form of connection. The next morning, you moved slower, not in pain, just heavier, your legs stiff, your shoulders tight, your breath a little shallower than usual. You stretched, made tea, but something didn't feel like it used to. And then you remembered the conversation, the notebook, the warning your doctor didn't say directly, but hinted at with one look. How often are you doing this? You didn't lie, but his silence told you something. There's more to this than most men realize. You sat back in your chair, pen in hand, and flipped to the next page. This wasn't about guilt. It was about curiosity, about finally knowing your body for what it is now, not what it used to be. And so you wrote, 5. Frequent masturbation after 70 can lead to muscle fatigue and lower recovery capacity. You used to bounce back in a few hours. Now it takes longer, sometimes a full day. That light soreness in your back, the lingering weakness in your thighs, the sudden nap you need after. You thought it was just age, but it's partly depletion, Because climax doesn't just release tension, it taps into your deep reserves, your minerals, your fluids, your core energy. And if you're not replenishing with food, hydration, movement, you're pulling from a well that no longer fills up quickly. You looked at your hands, strong but slower, your grip not what it once was. And then another truth surfaced, one that sat heavier. 6. If it becomes too frequent, you're slowly training your body to lose stamina. Not just sexual stamina, life stamina. Because your nervous system can't tell the difference between types of exertion. It only knows you're using effort, focus, and recovery chemicals. And when you train your body to rely on short bursts of pleasure instead of sustained presence, you shift your baseline. You condition yourself to weaken faster, and that shows up in slower walks, less interest in conversation, diminished focus, lower motivation to move. All things you've felt lately, but never connected. You sat back and closed your eyes, not ashamed, not scared, but clearer, because you finally understood. This body still wants pleasure, but it also wants to be strong, and I can't have both unless I learn how to balance them. You added both truths to the list. Drains recovery energy, weakens stamina if unchecked, then underlined one word: moderation. Not to cut out the joy, but to preserve the strength. You stood up, rolled your shoulders, looked in the mirror, and said quietly, I want to feel alive, not just released. And that, you realized, was a goal worth slowing down for. Later in the video, you'll discover the 7th and 8th truths, ones that most older men deny. How this habit, if misunderstood, can lead to emotional isolation and an unexpected loss of identity. You didn't expect it to feel like loneliness, but over time, it did. Not during, not in those few quiet minutes where you reached for release, for warmth, for something that felt like control. It was after. That moment when you pulled the blanket up, looked at the ceiling, and asked the question you didn't want to say out loud. Why do I feel more alone now than before? You used to think this was just about the body, but now you knew better. It was about connection, and that's when you wrote the next truth in your notebook. 7. When private pleasure becomes your only form of connection, isolation deepens. Not right away, but slowly, because your mind starts to believe that this is all there is, that you no longer need others, that this habit replaces closeness, conversation, touch from someone else. And the truth? It doesn't. It masks it. It gives the illusion of fulfillment, but leaves your heart emptier over time. You began to see how it changed your routines. You stopped reaching out, stopped walking down to the cafe, stopped making plans. You didn't lose interest in people. You just forgot what it felt like to need someone beyond your own skin. And it hurt more than you thought it would. Not because you were doing something wrong, but because you were doing it alone for too long. You added the final truth to the page. 8. If done without reflection, the habit can slowly rewrite your identity. This was the hardest one, because you'd always thought of yourself as strong, private, in control. But over time, this routine had become a refuge, and then, quietly, a cage. You stopped seeing your body as something you shared. It became something you managed. And even though you were still here, still breathing, still alive, you began to feel like a ghost in your own life. That night, you did something different. You didn't deny the need. You didn't shut yourself down. But you also didn't reach for the habit immediately. You sat. You placed a hand over your chest, and you asked the deeper question, what do I really need tonight? And the answer surprised you. You needed warmth. You needed touch. But more than that, you needed to feel human again. You closed the notebook, full now. 8 truths written, not in shame, but in freedom. You didn't need to quit. You needed to choose, with wisdom, with pacing, with a kind of care that honored what your body still asked for, without letting it take over your life. You whispered as you turned out the light, I can still want, but I also still belong, beyond myself. And you do. If this story helped you see yourself without shame, if it reminded you that even private things deserve dignity, please consider subscribing, because here we don't shame desire, we guide it, with presence, with knowledge, and with a quiet strength that lasts longer than the moment. You didn't ask for this body, but you've lived in it longer than most, carried it through youth, through change, through loss, through joy. And after all this time, you're still learning what it needs, what it craves, what it can handle, what it quietly asks for in the middle of the night, and what it deserves isn't shame, it's truth. You now understand what no one ever taught you. That pleasure changes, that release is real, but so is recovery. That loneliness can wear the mask of satisfaction, and that sometimes the thing you think you need is really a signal from your soul asking for deeper connection. You've written the truths. You've looked at yourself honestly. You've taken back control, not by denying who you are, but by deciding how to care for that person now, with intention, with rhythm, with kindness. You are still allowed to want, to feel, to touch, to explore. But now you do it with eyes wide open, not as an escape, but as a choice. And that difference, it's everything. You close the notebook, you fold the towel, you dim the lights, and before bed, you place one hand over your chest and say the words no one else ever taught you to speak. I still belong here, and I will treat my body like it belongs too. If this story helped you see your habits through a new lens, if it gave you strength to shift from silence to self-respect, please consider subscribing. Because here, we don't just talk about aging, we talk about honoring desire without letting it define you. We talk about how to care for your body as it keeps changing, even now.